The presentation of anarchism as social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
From Tolstoy's Search for the Kingdom of God, Gender and Queer Anarchism by Javier Sethness Castro. Reflecting his anti-militarist and queer anarchist values, Tolstoy presented progressive anti-imperialist views of Tsarist expansionism in his works The Cossacks and Haji Murat. Based on his youthful experiences as a Russian cadet in Transcaucasia, these novellas convey the author's clear distaste for the violence inherent to Tsarist imperialism. Unsurprisingly then, in 1885, when scores of revolutionaries in colonized Kiev were arrested, their libraries revealed underground copies of Tolstoy's writings. Plus, upon learning of Lev Nikolaevich's excommunication in 1901, students protested not only in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also in Kiev. Indeed, the near-simultaneous exhibition in Petersburg of Ilya Repin's painting of a contemplative Tolstoy meditating barefoot in the forest inspired agitation against the Tsarist regime. Tolstoy's death in 1910 itself was met with wildcat strikes, student protests, and marches in Moscow. Still, the Slavist Eva Thompson emphasizes in Imperial Knowledge that Pierre Bezukhov, one of Tolstoy's alter egos in War and Peace, inherits vast estates and armies of serfs in Kiev itself, hence becoming the, quote, largest landowner of the province, end quote. He thus profits from Empress Catherine II's 1793 partition of Poland, secondary to Russia's military defeat of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1792, and Russia's subsequent occupation of much more of Ukraine. Plus, he inherits a manor in Crimea, a territory that Catherine appropriated in 1783 from the indigenous Tatars, and which Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces likewise annexed from independent Ukraine in 2014. Although Bezukhov promises to free his serfs immediately, Thompson chastises Tolstoy for his indifference toward the imperial violence that underpins Pierre's wealth. This nonchalant attitude thus functions to normalize Tsarist colonialism in Eastern Europe, making the epic a, quote, colonialist novel in many respects, end quote. Indeed, as an illustration of Thompson's view of War and Peace as, quote, a work reconfirming the Russian imperial identity, end quote, the last Tsar, Nicholas Romanov, read it to his family with nostalgia in the interim between his abdication in February 1917 and their collective execution by the communists in July 1918. Significantly, in a new study of Tolstoy's appropriation of Bashkir steppe lands for his family's manor near Samara, first purchased in 1871, then expanded in 1878, and amounting to over 17,000 acres at its greatest extent, the Slavist Edita Bojanowska casts the Count as a colonial landlord who, despite rhetorically rejecting imperial conquests in his Caucasus novellas, failed to disavow Russia's settler colonial dispossession of indigenous nomadic peoples. Ironically financed by sales of War and Peace, the Samara estate was designed by the Count as a highly profitable enterprise for agricultural production and the crossbreeding of horses to be sold to the imperial cavalry. Accordingly, it paid off the Tolstoy's Moscow home in the proletarian neighborhood of Khamovniki. Lev Nikolaevich bought these occupied Bashkir lands from Russian generals who had been awarded them for brutal services rendered to the empire. Cynically, in much the same way, he pressured his wife Sofia Andreevna to purchase some expensive stallions in 1882. This, after having publicly disavowed money and property. In this light, Thompson and Bojanowska's critical insights must be welcomed and recognized. After all, as we suggested in Queer Tolstoy, the artist unfortunately does betray some sympathies with Russian chauvinism, especially in War and Peace. that contradict his internationalist anarchist ideal. Plus, in the Cossacks, he arguably does not affirm the full humanity of the Muslim Chechen characters. Furthermore, the Tatars who aided in the defense of the port city of Sevastopol during the Crimean War are conspicuously absent from Tolstoy's Sevastopol sketches, just as the Muslim Bashkir cavalry units that helped defeat Napoleon go unacknowledged in War and Peace. Neither can we forget the elders' lamentations over Russian defeats at the siege of Port Arthur and the Battle of Tsushima during the Russo-Japanese War, much less his momentary yet unrealized impulse to join the Russian military in suppressing the Polish uprising of 1863. Along these lines, Thompson actually quotes an eye-opening letter by Tolstoy wherein he declares, quote, "For me, it is a completely indifferent matter that the Poles are being oppressed." End quote. Such marked narcissistic and Russian chauvinist attitudes contrast sharply with the internationalist sympathies and joys that Alexander Herzen, the so-called father of Russian socialism, and his university friends felt for the Polish insurrection of November 1830, as summarized in the slogan, "For our freedom and yours." This revolt likely activated what George Katsiafikas terms an Eros effect, whereby Herzen and his comrades found common cause with the Polish struggle against Tsarism, thus sublimating the instinctual human need for freedom. By contrast, Alexander Pushkin, Russia's national poet and Tolstoy's third cousin once removed, celebrated the crushing of the uprising. Tolstoy's anti-Polonist bias furthermore clashes with the joint struggle that Herzen and his comrade Mikhail Bakunin undertook with leaders of the Polish revolt of 1863-64. Indeed, Herzen's widely read newspaper, The Bell, fell out of disfavor with most of its Russian readership due to its editorial support for the Polish cause. Cast in this critical light, it may seem less incongruous than at first glance that Putin's regime brazenly plastered Tolstoy's face onto a high fence surrounding the ruins of the Mariupol Drama Theater, a former sanctuary for hundreds of Ukrainian civilians, including many children, which the Russian military destroyed during its full-scale invasion in March 2022. Still, one might hope that Lev Nikolaevich, were he to be resurrected, would participate in journalistic efforts to uncover the brutal realities of the Russo-Ukrainian War, while supporting war resistance, conscientious objection, and desertion. After all, his pacifist followers resisted militarism, nationalism, and violence, as they fought for, quote, "freedom of conscience, alternatives to military service, and tolerance between peoples," as Irina Gordeeva notes. In reality, his great-granddaughter, Marta Albertini, honors the cause through her direct support of Ukrainian refugees. While Tolstoy likely would have opposed Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and refused to bless the bombing of the Mariupol Drama Theater, whereas more traditional Russian writers like Pushkin and Fyodor Dostoevsky would likely have enthusiastically supported both, Tolstoy's ambivalence over Russian settler colonialism and imperialist chauvinism allows Putin's neo-fascist regime the opportunity to try to legitimize its crimes by appealing to his legacy as an integral part of the imperialist concept of the Russian world. That being said, Tolstoy is far from the worst offender among Russian artists in this sense, and his championing of non-cooperation with evil could serve as an important lens through which to view the Russo-Ukrainian War. Guardian journalist Luke Harding describes the war as, quote, "this century's most stunning example of naked imperialism," end quote, while Ukrainian historian Serhiy Plokhy defines it as an ongoing war of independence. During this conflict, Ukrainian society has exemplified non-cooperation by wielding what Harding calls its, quote, "one secret weapon," end quote, namely, its horizontal collectivism, as against Russia's hegemonic practice of neo-feudal verticalism. This phenomenon manifests itself in the courageous and egalitarian spirit of Ukraine's anti-colonial resistance to the Russian invaders, the cultural distrust of rulers, the widespread practice of self-organization, mutual aid, mutual support, and grassroots humanitarianism, the armed struggle by Tatars in occupied Crimea, the work of the anti-authoritarian relief organization Solidarity Collectives, and plans to found internationalist anarchist combat units within the Ukrainian territorial defense, among many other examples. This war evinces not only Russia's genocidal attempt to recolonize Ukraine, but also the paradox of misogyny, whereby the patriarchal aggressor uses violence on vulnerable targets to satisfy his sadistic and authoritarian desires. These brutal psychodynamics underpin not only Russia's ghastly attacks on maternity and pediatric cancer hospitals in Ukraine, but also the nuclear blackmail that Putin uses to shield the invasion. Such dehumanization of the other has long facilitated Russia's imperialist ultraviolence against Ukrainians, from the leveling of the Cossack city of Baturin in 1708 to the communist post-revolutionary annexation of independent Ukraine, Red Fascist Joseph Stalin's cruel policies of forcible collectivization, the resultant Holodomor famine, and wartime mass deportations of Crimean Tatars, plus the Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986. The invading military's forcible transfer of between 20,000 and over 200,000 Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation is a genocidal crime for which Putin and Maria Lvova-Bielova, Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights, have rightly been charged at the International Criminal Court, which demands their arrests, just as the International Court of Justice orders Russia to halt its attacks. Despite his anti-militarism and pacifism, Lev Nikolaevich affirmed the Narodnik belief that Russia's peasantry could play a messianic role in world history by building the universal commune, even if this involved the dispossession of indigenous and nomadic peoples. The Cossacks is critical of his object of study, the Grebensk Cossack host, whose Zaporizhian counterparts are revered by many Ukrainians. Plus, War and Peace affirms Russian exceptionalism. That being said, one of Tolstoy's most significant emotional partners in life was a Ukrainian peasant named Isak Feinerman. Plus, as though by chance, in the aftermath of Russia's destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam on the Dnieper River in June 2023, journalist Igor Burdiga reported that a Ukrainian parliamentarian had, quote, promised to adopt a large mongrel called Tolstoy, end quote, who was displaced alongside so many other fellow animals and humans by the disastrous flooding. This stated commitment to a care ethics for animals coincides with Tolstoy's dual recognition of the suffering of non-human animals, especially in war, and demand for animal liberation. Many other scenes from the Russo-Ukrainian War are reminiscent of War and Peace. For one, the Ukrainian villager Natalia's remark that her compatriot liberators were, quote, so handsome, so beautiful, especially compared to the Russian fascists, end quote, recalls the comrade love that Tolstoy inserts into several homoerotic battle sequences in the prose poem. Ukrainian society has united courageously to resist the Russian invaders and occupiers, echoing the confrontation between the Narod and the Grand Armée in Tolstoy's epic, and the biblical struggle of David versus Goliath. At his best, then, when it comes to war, Lev Nikolaevich proposes the anarchist alternative. Rather than us or them, both we and they, together and as equals. Such perspectives are in keeping with Ukrainian anarchist Mikhailo Drahomanov's intercommunal and federalist vision for building autonomy in Ukraine. They are consistent as well with the international support provided by Bakunin and his fellow anti-authoritarian Enrico Malatesta to the self-determination of oppressed peoples.
Thank you for listening. To help others find anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.